October 20th, 1944. The Philippine Sea churned beneath a moonless sky as Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's formidable fleet cut through the darkness at 18 knots. From the bridge of the battleship Yamato, officers peered into the night with confidence, born of tactical certainty. They had successfully evaded American patrol aircraft for the past 6 hours, slipping through the San Bernardino Strait under the cover of a tropical squall. The radar operators aboard the Japanese vessels detected nothing unusual, their primitive systems showing empty screens. They believed themselves invisible, ghosts moving toward their objective at Leyte Gulf. What they didn't know would transform naval warfare forever. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how American radar technology, operating in ways the Japanese fleet couldn't even imagine, tracked every movement of their ships while Kurita's commanders remained convinced they had achieved complete tactical surprise. It's a tale of technological superiority, so absolute that one side fought a battle they thought was spontaneous, while the other had been watching them for hours, plotting every course change, counting every vessel, and preparing a reception that would shatter the myth of invisibility forever. Commander Hiroaki Abe stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Haguro, his eyes scanning the horizon with a practiced intensity developed over 20 years of naval service. The night was darker than he preferred, clouds obscuring even the faint starlight, but this same darkness provided the concealment his fleet desperately needed. Their mission was audacious, perhaps even desperate, but success depended entirely on maintaining the element of surprise until they reached the vulnerable American landing forces at Leyte Gulf. Lieutenant Kenji Matsumoto, the ship's communications officer, approached with a message. The young officer's voice carried the quiet confidence of a man who believed their tactics had succeeded. "Our radar shows no contact, sir. The American air patrols have turned back. I believe we have successfully broken through their search perimeter." Abe nodded, though a small uncertainty gnawed at the edges of his tactical certainty. The Americans had demonstrated remarkable capability in recent months, their technology seemingly advancing at an impossible pace. But Japanese intelligence reports insisted that American radar systems, while effective, had significant limitations in range and reliability. The squall they had transited through should have masked their approach completely. Their own radar, though admittedly less sophisticated than American equipment, showed no signs of enemy vessels in the vicinity. What Commander Abe couldn't know, what no Japanese officer in the fleet could possibly imagine, was that at that very moment, 230 kilometers away, a team of American radar operators aboard the light cruiser Denver were watching his entire fleet with crystal clarity. Lieutenant Robert Chen leaned closer to his radar scope, the green phosphorescent display showing multiple contacts arranged in a formation that made his pulse quicken. The images were so clear he could distinguish individual vessels, count their numbers, and track their speed with remarkable precision. He had been monitoring this contact group for the past 2 hours, watching them emerge from the San Bernardino Strait and begin their approach toward Leyte Gulf. "This is incredible," Chen said to his colleague, Petty Officer First Class James Morrison, who stood beside him operating a parallel radar system. "I'm counting 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and at least 13 destroyers. They're maintaining formation speed at 18 knots, bearing 270 degrees. Morrison nodded, his own display confirming every detail Chen reported. The new radar modifications they had received just 3 weeks earlier had transformed their capability in ways that still amazed him. The system could now track surface contacts at ranges that would have seemed impossible just months before. More importantly, it could do so continuously, maintaining contact even through weather conditions that would have blinded earlier equipment. "They think they're invisible," Morrison observed, a note of something between pity and strategic satisfaction in his voice. "Look at their formation. They're not even attempting electronic countermeasures or evasive maneuvers. They genuinely believe they've slipped through undetected." Chen was already on the communication line to the Combat Information Center, his voice calm but urgent. "Combat, this is Radar Room. I have multiple surface contacts, designated Raid 1, bearing 270 degrees, range 230 kilometers. Configuration consistent with major surface action group. 4 capital ships, 8 cruisers, 13 destroyers. Course 105 degrees, speed 18 knots. They appear to be heading directly for Leyte Gulf. The response came immediately from Commander Harold Fisher, the Combat Information Officer. Confirm your contact radar. Are you certain of these numbers? Affirmative, Combat. Contact is solid. We've been tracking them for 2 hours. They emerged from San Bernardino Strait at 2100 hours and have maintained steady course and speed since then. Signal strength and radar cross-section are consistent with major combatant vessels. What Chen and Morrison were witnessing represented the culmination of a technological revolution that had been building throughout the war. The American radar systems now deployed across the Pacific Fleet incorporated advances that Japanese intelligence had either missed entirely or dismissed as impossible. The cavity magnetron, a British invention that America had refined and mass-produced, had increased radar power and sensitivity by orders of magnitude. New antenna designs provided better target discrimination. Signal processing techniques allowed operators to distinguish between real contacts and sea clutter with unprecedented accuracy. But perhaps most significantly, the Americans had developed a tactical doctrine that integrated radar into every aspect of naval operations. While Japanese ships carried radar as an auxiliary tool, American vessels had made it the foundation of their combat capabilities. Every maneuver, every tactical decision, every strategic plan now incorporated radar information as primary intelligence. Aboard the Yamato, Vice Admiral Kurita stood in the flag plot room reviewing his operational plans. The charts before him showed the planned approach to Leyte Gulf, the timing carefully calculated to arrive at dawn, when his heavy guns could devastate the American landing forces. His staff officers, experienced men who had survived the grinding attrition of the past 3 years, worked with quiet efficiency around him. Admiral, the navigation officer reported, "We are on schedule. Current speed maintains our timetable for arrival at Leyte Gulf at 0600 hours. Weather conditions remain favorable for concealment." Kurita studied the charts with the analytical mind of a career officer who had risen through merit and survival. The plan was bold, perhaps the Japanese Navy's last opportunity to achieve a significant tactical victory. American air superiority had made daytime surface operations suicidal. Night approaches and dawn attacks represented their only viable tactical option. Everything depended on surprise, on reaching the vulnerable transports and landing craft before American carrier aircraft could respond. "What concerns do you have about American radar detection?" Kurita asked his operations officer. Commander Toshio Nakamura. Nakamura, a careful officer known for his thorough analysis, consulted his notes before responding. "Our intelligence indicates American radar capabilities are formidable, but not unlimited. The weather we transited through should have degraded their search effectiveness. Additionally, we have received no indication of American reconnaissance aircraft in the area for the past 6 hours. If they had detected us, we would expect to see patrol planes attempting to maintain contact." It was logical analysis based on the best intelligence available to Japanese commanders. What they didn't realize was that American radar had evolved beyond the point where aircraft were necessary for maintaining contact. The very absence of patrol planes should have worried them, but instead it reinforced their conviction that they had achieved surprise. Meanwhile, aboard the Denver, the radar room had become the focal point of an expanding tactical picture. Lieutenant Chen's initial contact report had triggered a cascade of communications across the American fleet. Within 30 minutes, Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commanding the bombardment and fire support group at Leyte Gulf, had received comprehensive intelligence on the approaching Japanese force. The detail available to American commanders would have seemed like magic to their adversaries. They knew not only that a Japanese fleet was approaching, but its exact composition, course, speed, and projected arrival time. They knew it consisted of 4 battleships, the super battleship Yamato being positively identified by its distinctive radar signature. They knew the supporting cruisers and destroyers by class, having catalogued the radar characteristics of different vessel types through years of systematic observation. But more than just passive observation, the American radar network was now actively guiding defensive preparations. Admiral Oldendorf began positioning his 6 older battleships across the northern approach to Leyte Gulf, setting up what would become one of naval history's most decisive ambushes. Every movement, every positioning was calculated based on real-time radar intelligence that the Japanese fleet couldn't detect and wouldn't have believed possible if told. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Bradford, operations officer aboard the battleship West Virginia, reviewed the tactical plot with growing amazement. The precision of the intelligence was unlike anything he had experienced earlier in the war. "We know exactly where they are, exactly where they're going, and exactly when they'll arrive," he said to his commanding officer, Captain Herbert Rowley. "It's like watching someone walk into a room with the lights off while we can see everything." Rowley, her veteran who had survived Pearl Harbor aboard the Maryland, understood the significance of what they were witnessing. 3 years ago, we were the ones surprised, caught unprepared by an enemy we couldn't see coming. Tonight, the situation is reversed. They're sailing toward us with the same confidence that the Japanese carriers had approaching Hawaii, and they have no idea we've been watching them for hours. The battleships began their final positioning, their movements coordinated entirely through radar-guided precision. The West Virginia, Tennessee, California, Maryland, Mississippi, and Pennsylvania formed a line across the Surigao Strait, their main batteries loaded and ready, their fire control radars already locked onto targets that were still dozens of kilometers away. The technological advantage extended beyond detection. American fire control radar had evolved into systems capable of directing accurate gunfire at targets that were completely invisible to the human eye. The Mark 8 fire control radar, coupled with mechanical computers that calculated ballistic solutions, allowed American battleships to engage targets with precision that would have seemed impossible just years before. Aboard the Yamato, Commander Abe continued his watch, still confident in their tactical approach. His confidence was not unreasonable given the information available to him. Japanese naval doctrine, developed through decades of training and combat experience, emphasized night combat skills and the superior night optical equipment carried by their vessels. Their crews had trained extensively in night battle tactics, and their commanders believed this gave them a crucial advantage over American forces. What Japanese commanders couldn't fully appreciate was how thoroughly American technology had negated their tactical advantages. Night combat skills mattered little when the enemy could see you from 200 kilometers away. Superior optical equipment was irrelevant when radar could track and target vessels in complete darkness. Training and experience, while valuable, couldn't overcome the fundamental asymmetry created by technological superiority. Lieutenant Matsumoto approached Commander Abe again, this time with a weather report. "The meteorological officer predicts clearing skies by 0300 hours, sir. This will improve our optical observation, but may increase visibility of our fleet." Abe considered this information carefully. The clearing weather was both opportunity and risk. Better visibility would help their lookouts and gunnery officers, but might also expose them to American detection. Still, they would be well into their approach by 0300 hours, and the darkness would persist until dawn. "We will maintain current course and speed," he decided. "By the time visibility improves, we should be too close for the Americans to effectively respond." It was the kind of tactical decision that made perfect sense within the framework of pre-radar naval warfare. But in the new reality of radar-dominated combat, it was based on assumptions that were fundamentally obsolete. The American radar operators continued their patient watch, the green phosphorescent displays tracking every movement of the approaching fleet. Petty Officer Morrison noted each minor course adjustment, each subtle change in formation. He could see when individual destroyers adjusted their positions, when the main body altered speed by even a single knot. The level of detailed intelligence would have seemed impossible to officers from earlier wars. Lieutenant Chen received a communication from the Combat Information Center requesting an updated position report. He consulted his display and responded with precision that reflected the quality of his information. Raid 1 now at bearing 265 degrees, range 180 kilometers. Course steady at 105 degrees, speed maintaining 18 knots. Estimate contact with our picket destroyers in approximately 4 hours. The message was relayed up the command chain, each level adding analysis and tactical recommendations. Admiral Oldendorf reviewed the intelligence and refined his defensive positions. Every element of his force was now positioned based on the certainty that they knew exactly where the Japanese fleet would be and when they would arrive. The hours passed with the Japanese fleet continuing their approach, their commanders maintaining their belief in successful tactical surprise. Aboard the various vessels, crews prepared for the coming battle with the ritual of experienced warriors. Gun crews checked their equipment, engineers monitored their propulsion systems, damage control teams positioned themselves at their stations. Everyone understood that the next few hours would determine not just the outcome of this battle, but possibly the entire Philippine campaign. Vice Admiral Kurita moved through the Yamato with the calm demeanor expected of a flag officer, but his mind worked through endless tactical calculations. The plan required precise timing, aggressive execution, and the advantage of surprise. If they achieved all three, they might inflict catastrophic damage on the American landing forces. If they failed, his fleet would be destroyed with nothing accomplished. What he couldn't know, what seemed impossible within his understanding of naval warfare, was that surprise had already been lost. Not lost in the conventional sense through detection by aircraft or submarines, but lost to a technology that operated beyond the range of visual or acoustic detection, that tracked his movements with a precision his intelligence officers would have dismissed as fantasy. As the range closed below 100 kilometers, American commanders began final preparations for what would become the Battle of Surigao Strait. The positioning was perfect, the intelligence was comprehensive, and the technological advantage was overwhelming. The radar displays showed the Japanese fleet approaching exactly as predicted, maintaining their course toward an ambush they couldn't detect. Lieutenant Commander Bradford, watching the tactical plot aboard the West Virginia, felt an unexpected moment of empathy for the approaching enemy. "They have no idea," he said quietly. "They're executing their plan perfectly, following their doctrine, doing everything their training taught them. And none of it matters because they're fighting yesterday's war with yesterday's technology." Captain Rowley understood his officer's sentiment, but maintained the professional detachment necessary for command. "Conflict isn't fair, Commander. It's about leveraging every advantage you can create. 3 years ago, they had better training, better tactics, better equipment in many categories. They used those advantages without mercy. Now the technology has shifted, and we have capabilities they can't match. That's not unfair. That's just the nature of technological evolution in times of conflict." The Japanese fleet continued their approach, radar screens aboard their vessels still showing empty seas ahead. Their lookouts, despite their excellent optical equipment and years of training, saw nothing in the darkness. Their commanders reviewed their attack plans, confident that they were approaching an unprepared enemy who had no warning of their presence. The reality was so different from their understanding that the coming engagement would represent not just a tactical setback, but a fundamental revelation about how technology had transformed naval operations. They were sailing toward an enemy who had been watching every movement for hours, who had positioned forces with perfect precision, who would open fire at ranges that Japanese commanders would have considered impossible. At 0300 hours, exactly as the meteorological officer had predicted, the clouds began to clear. Visibility improved from near zero to several kilometers. Aboard the Japanese vessels, lookouts strained their eyes searching for any sign of American forces. They saw nothing. And this continued to reinforce the fleet's conviction that they had achieved surprise. What they couldn't see, what no amount of optical superiority could reveal, were the American battleships positioned in perfect ambush formation across their path, their main batteries trained on targets their radar had been tracking for hours, their fire control systems already calculating precise ballistic solutions. Lieutenant Chen, who had been at his radar station for nearly 6 hours straight, watched as the range continued to decrease. Raid 1 now at bearing 260 degrees, range 65 kilometers, he reported. They're entering the engagement zone. The order came down from Admiral Oldendorf to all ships in the battle line. Commence firing when targets enter range. Fire control reports they have solid radar locks on multiple targets. Aboard the Yamato, Vice Admiral Kurita stood on the bridge as dawn approached. still confident that his fleet was executing a surprise attack. The first indication he received that something was catastrophically wrong came not from his radar operators or his lookouts, but from the flash of heavy guns firing in the darkness ahead. The American battleships opened fire at a range of 23 kilometers, their shells falling with devastating accuracy on targets they had been tracking for hours. The Japanese fleet, caught in a prepared ambush they couldn't have detected, found themselves under precise fire from an enemy who seemed to possess supernatural knowledge of their exact positions. Commander Abe, on the bridge of the Haguro, watched in disbelief as shells bracketed his vessel with accuracy that seemed impossible given the darkness and range. "They knew we were coming," he said, the realization transforming his understanding of the tactical situation. "They've been tracking us. But how? Our radar showed nothing. We saw no patrol aircraft. How did they know?" Lieutenant Matsumoto, standing beside him, could offer no answer. The young officer's confidence had evaporated, replaced by the terrifying realization that they were fighting an enemy with capabilities beyond their comprehension. "It's as if they could see through darkness itself, sir. As if they had eyes that worked beyond the range of human vision." The engagement lasted several hours, but its outcome was never in doubt. The Japanese fleet, caught in a prepared ambush by an enemy with overwhelming technological advantage, suffered catastrophic losses. The Yamato and other surviving vessels were forced to retreat, their mission a complete failure. What was supposed to be a decisive surprise attack had become a one-sided engagement, where one side fought blind while the other possessed near-perfect intelligence. In the aftermath, as surviving Japanese officers tried to understand what had happened, they began to grasp the true significance of American radar capability. This wasn't simply a matter of slightly better equipment or somewhat improved detection range. This represented a fundamental transformation in naval operations, where one side could see and track everything, while the other operated in comparative blindness. A captured Japanese officer, Commander Yuki Tanaka from the heavy cruiser Mogami, spoke with his American interrogators several days after the engagement. When they asked him what had surprised him most about American capabilities, his answer revealed the psychological impact of technological superiority. "We knew you had radar," he said. "Our intelligence reports described your systems, but we thought it was similar to our own equipment, perhaps somewhat better but still limited by the same fundamental constraints. We believed that weather, darkness, and careful navigation could allow us to evade detection. We were wrong about everything. Your radar isn't just better than ours, it's so superior that it's like comparing a candle to the sun. You could see us from distances and through conditions that we thought made detection impossible. We were fighting blind against an enemy who could see everything." American radar operators who had tracked the Japanese fleet felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and something approaching pity for an enemy who had been so comprehensively outmatched. Petty Officer Morrison, reflecting on the experience weeks later, tried to articulate what it had been like to possess such complete intelligence advantage. "It was strange," he admitted to a fellow sailor. "We watched them for hours. We saw every ship, tracked every movement, knew their exact course and speed at every moment. They were sailing toward us with what they thought was stealth and tactical cunning. But from our perspective, it was like watching someone try to sneak through a brightly lit room while genuinely believing they were invisible. You almost wanted to warn them, to tell them they were completely exposed. But of course, that wasn't our job. Our job was to track them precisely so our forces could position for the ambush, which we did." The technological gap that the Battle of Surigao Strait revealed went far beyond simple equipment superiority. It represented different fundamental approaches to naval operations and different levels of industrial capability. The United States had invested enormous resources in radar development, producing thousands of systems and training tens of thousands of operators. American industry could manufacture sophisticated radar equipment in quantities that Japanese industry couldn't match, even if they had possessed equivalent designs. Lieutenant Chen, whose initial tracking had started the chain of intelligence that led to American victory, received a commendation for his performance during the engagement. But when asked about it later, he emphasized the systemic nature of American advantage rather than individual skill, Anyone trained on our equipment could have done what I did, he insisted. The radar operators on dozens of other ships were tracking the same contacts I was. We had redundant coverage, multiple systems all providing the same information. That's the real advantage. Not that one ship or one operator could see them, but that our entire fleet could maintain continuous tracking through multiple redundant systems. They couldn't hide from us because we had too many ways of seeing them. The Battle of Surigao Strait became a case study in technological transformation of naval operations. Japanese naval officers, studying the engagement in the years after the conflict ended, recognized it as a turning point where traditional skills and tactics became insufficient against superior technology. Admiral Kiyohide Shima, who participated in the engagement and survived, later wrote in his memoirs about the psychological impact of fighting against such overwhelming technological advantage. "We had trained for years in night combat," he wrote. "We believed our skills and experience gave us an edge in darkness. But all our training became irrelevant when the enemy possessed systems that turned night into day for their purposes. They didn't need superior night vision or better optical equipment because their radar gave them something far better: the ability to see everything regardless of conditions. We were like medieval knights charging against modern rifles. Our courage and skill didn't matter because the fundamental nature of combat had changed." The radar technology that had proven so decisive continued to evolve after the engagement. American systems became more sophisticated, more reliable, and more widely deployed throughout the Pacific Fleet. By the end of the conflict, radar had become so integral to American naval operations that ships without it were considered obsolete. Japanese forces, meanwhile, struggled to develop equivalent capabilities, hampered by industrial limitations, technological gaps, and the increasing difficulty of conducting research and development. While under constant strategic pressure, Vice Admiral Kurita survived the engagement, but his fleet had suffered devastating losses. In his post-action report, filed weeks after the encounter, he noted with bitter honesty the fundamental nature of Japanese tactical failure. "We believed we had achieved surprise," he wrote. "All our indicators suggested successful evasion of enemy detection. Our radar showed no contacts. Our lookouts saw no patrol aircraft. We received no evidence of enemy awareness. But we were wrong from the beginning. The Americans were tracking us from the moment we entered the strait, perhaps even before. They knew our position, our composition, our course, and our speed, with a precision that seems impossible even knowing they possess it. We sailed into a prepared ambush while believing we were executing a surprise attack. This represents not merely tactical setback, but a fundamental failure to understand how technological advantage had transformed naval operations. The human cost of technological asymmetry was measured in thousands of sailors who experienced an engagement that was decided by electronics and physics rather than courage or skill. The Japanese fleet lost multiple vessels and suffered casualties that it could never replace. American forces, meanwhile, achieved a decisive victory with minimal losses precisely because their technological advantage allowed them to fight from a position of near-perfect information superiority. Years after the engagement, veterans from both sides occasionally met at historical conferences and commemorations. The conversations were often marked by a strange mixture of former enemy combatants trying to understand each other's perspective. A Japanese officer, reflecting on his experience of fighting blind against an enemy who could see everything, described it as like being in a nightmare where you're trying to run but can't move, while your pursuer walks calmly toward you. "We thought we were being clever, using darkness and weather to hide our approach, but they were watching us the entire time, tracking every move we made. The feeling of helplessness, when you realize your enemy knows everything about your position, while you know nothing about theirs, is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it." American veterans, for their part, recognized that their technological advantage represented industrial and scientific achievement rather than individual superiority. One radar operator, speaking decades after the conflict, emphasized this point carefully. "We won because our country had the resources and technical knowledge to develop and deploy systems that the Japanese couldn't match. Not because we were smarter or braver, but because we had better tools created by better industrial capacity." If the situation had been reversed, if they had possessed radar superiority while we operated with primitive detection systems, the outcome would have been just as one-sided in their favor. The Battle of Surigao Strait marked the last time battleships would engage in a major surface action. It was also one of the clearest demonstrations of how radar had transformed naval operations from an art that balanced visual observation, tactical intuition, and seamanship into a science where information superiority provided overwhelming advantage. The Japanese fleet's conviction that they had successfully evaded detection, maintained for hours, even as American radar tracked their every movement, illustrated how completely technology had changed the fundamental nature of combat at sea. The story of that October night in 1944 remains a powerful reminder of how technological advancement can create decisive advantage in times of conflict. It shows how even skilled, experienced, well-trained forces can be rendered ineffective when their opponents possess capabilities that operate beyond their understanding. Most poignantly, it demonstrates the human cost when technological asymmetry reaches the point where one side fights with near-perfect intelligence while the other operates in comparative blindness. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.